In the glittering yet decaying heart of 18th century France, in an age where chandeliers sparkled above the marble halls of Versailles, while peasants starved in the mud outside, one scandal rose above all others. A scandal that did not merely tarnish reputations, but set fire to them. A scandal that whispered through salons, thundered in pamphlets, and echoed across the very foundations of the monarchy. This was the affair of the diamond necklace, a tale of greed, seduction, manipulation, and ruin. A tale that forever bound the name of Marie Antoinette, the Queen of France, to a crime she never committed, yet could never escape. Marie Antoinette was already hated. She was Austrian by birth, and the French never forgave her foreign blood. She was young, careless, extravagant, mocked as Madame Deficit, accused of wasting fortunes while the treasury collapsed, accused of indulging in luxury while children starved. Every gesture she made, every jewel she wore, was magnified into proof of corruption. Her enemies did not need truth. They needed a story, and they found one in a forgotten woman named Jeanne de Valois-Saint-Rémy. Jeanne was of royal blood in name only, a descendant of the Valois kings, yet abandoned to poverty. She grew up on the margins of society, half noble, half beggar. She carried in her veins the pride of ancestry and the desperation of hunger. She believed the world owed her greatness, and if it did not come, she would take it by cunning. Beside her stood her husband, Nicolas de la Motte, a restless soldier with no fortune, no honor, and no scruples. The two of them were bound not by love alone, but by ambition. They would claw their way upward, by deceit if necessary. Their greatest tool was Cardinal Louis de Rohan, once one of the most powerful men in France, but ruined by arrogance. At the Austrian court he had insulted Empress Maria Theresa, earning the hatred of her daughter, Marie Antoinette, who despised him for his vanity, mocked him for his failures, and cut him off from influence. Rohan was desperate, desperate to be restored, desperate to be forgiven, desperate to stand again at the Queen's side. Jeanne saw this desperation, and she shaped it into her weapon. She whispered to him that she was close to the Queen. She whispered that the Queen longed to reconcile. She whispered that forgiveness could be his. And Rohan, blinded by pride, believed her. And so, in the shadows of Versailles, the seeds of one of history's most infamous scams were planted. A fraud that would not only destroy reputations, but would become a spark, a wound, a poison in the veins of monarchy itself. A fraud that would help bring down a queen, and with her, an empire. To understand the affair of the diamond necklace, we must meet its cast, each player driven by vanity, hunger, or desperation, each of them believing they were clever, when in truth, they were weaving their own ruin. First, Jeanne de Valois-Saint-Rémy, a woman born with the shadow of nobility but none of its privileges. She carried the proud blood of the Valois kings, yet lived her youth in poverty, raised with bitterness, convinced that destiny had robbed her. She vowed to claim what was rightfully hers, not by patience, but by schemes. Jeanne had charm, she had beauty, and she had a mind sharp as broken glass. She learned quickly that men with power could be deceived if they were fed with dreams. Her husband, Nicolas de la Motte, shared her ambitions. He was a soldier without fortune, restless, cunning, and willing to follow his wife's designs wherever they led. Into their net fell Cardinal Louis de Rohan, Prince of the Church, glittering in robes, dripping with wealth, yet desperate for the forgiveness of the Queen. Once he had mocked her mother, the Empress Maria Theresa, and Marie Antoinette never forgave him. He longed to return to favor, to kneel before the queen and be seen once more as her ally. Jeanne saw this weakness and transformed it into her opportunity. She told Rohan that she had the queen's ear, that the queen longed for reconciliation, that all he needed was proof of loyalty, and Rohan, blinded by vanity, believed every word. To complete her illusion, Jeanne enlisted accomplices, a forger named Rétaux de Villette, whose quill could mimic royal handwriting with dangerous perfection, and a young woman named Nicole d'Oliva, a prostitute with a face strikingly similar to the queen. She would become the living mask in Jeanne's theater of lies. And then, the centerpiece of the entire drama, the necklace itself, 2,500 diamonds, weighing nearly 3,000 carats, crafted by jewelers Baymer and Bassange. They had poured their fortunes and reputations into this creation, intended as a gift for Louis XV to offer his mistress. But Louis XV had died before the necklace could be sold, and now it lay unsold, a burden, a temptation, a glittering curse. No queen in Europe dared buy it. It was too extravagant, too scandalous, too heavy with symbolism. Yet for Jeanne, it became the perfect bait. She whispered to Rohan that the queen desired it, not for vanity, but to prove her love for France, to restore glory to the crown, to show generosity in secret, and the cardinal, yearning to believe, allowed himself to be led. A stage was set. The jewelers desperate to sell, the cardinal desperate to please, the queen already hated Jeanne, ready to strike. And behind the curtain, the necklace gleamed, waiting to become not an ornament, but a weapon that would wound a queen and shake a kingdom. Jeanne de Valois-Saint-Rémy, now armed with desperation, ambition, and a stage full of gullible players, began weaving the strands of her grand deception. It was not merely a lie, it was theater, a performance where every prop, every letter, and every whisper would serve her purpose. The first act was the letters, forged with care by Rétaux de Villette. His quill danced across parchment, imitating the delicate handwriting of Marie Antoinette. The words dripped with royal grace, yet they were poison. In them, the queen seemed to whisper to Rohan, hinting at forgiveness, hinting at affection, even hinting at secret love. Each letter a net cast around his pride, drawing him closer. Cardinal Rohan, blinded by vanity, believed them. He treasured each note as if it were scripture, convinced that the queen, once his enemy, now longed for reconciliation. He read passion where there was only ink. He saw redemption where there was only fraud. But words alone could not sustain the illusion. Jeanne needed flesh, a living queen. And so she found Nicole d'Oliva, a young courtesan whose resemblance to Marie Antoinette was close enough to deceive in shadows. In the gardens of Versailles, at night, d'Oliva played her role, cloaked in mystery. She stepped forward to meet Rohan. The cardinal bowed low, his heart racing, believing he stood before his queen. She handed him a rose, a simple gesture. Yet to Rohan it was a sacrament, proof of forgiveness, proof of love. He left that night convinced he was chosen, convinced he was beloved, convinced he was destined to serve his queen once more. Meanwhile, Jeanne whispered to the jewelers, Baymer and Bassange, telling them that the queen secretly desired their necklace but could not publicly buy it. Too much scandal, too much scrutiny. Instead, she would acquire it through Rohan, her trusted intermediary, a man she was said to favor once again. The jewelers, desperate to sell their creation, saw a salvation. They believed that through Rohan they would finally be rid of the necklace that had cursed their fortune, their reputations, and their peace. And so, the trap tightened. Forged letters, false meetings, whispered promises and glittering diamonds, all circling around the vanity of one man, the hunger of one woman, and the name of a queen who knew nothing of it. Around Versailles, gossip spread like perfume. The court thrived on whispers. No rumor was too small, no scandal too large. Pamphlets filled Paris mocking the queen, exaggerating her sins, inventing her vices when the necklace was whispered of. It was not questioned, because people already believed the worst, and Jeanne knew this. She knew that in a world where truth was fragile and scandal was irresistible, all she needed to do was set the stage, light the fire, and let society itself spread the smoke. The conspiracy was no longer a plan. It was alive, breathing, unfolding, moving toward its climax, a climax that would not only trap Rohan, not only ruin Jeanne's victims, but would entangle Marie Antoinette herself in a web she could never escape. In August 1785, the plot that had been spun with whispers and shadows finally tore into daylight. The necklace, the forged letters, the staged meetings, all converged into a single explosion that would shake the French court. The jewelers, Baumer and Bassinge, delivered the necklace into Cardinal Rohan's hands. Believing he acted for the queen, they expected gratitude, royal acknowledgement, and at last, their release from financial ruin. But soon, the queen denied everything. She had never desired the necklace, never asked for Rohan's help, never spoken a word to Jeanne. Marie Antoinette herself became both actress and target. She was young, beautiful, playful. She danced. She acted in private theaters. She laughed too loudly for her critics. She gambled. She wore extravagant dresses. And in a court where every gesture was judged, her smallest indulgence became ammunition. To her friends, she was charming. To her enemies, she was reckless. To the pamphleteers, she was a villain, ready-made. Versailles magnified her life, her joys, her sorrows, her mistakes. And when the necklace scandal erupted, the palace turned into a stage for tragedy. Courtiers whispered in galleries. Did the queen truly desire the jewels? Was she capable of deception? Every nod, every smile, every absence was read as a clue. The palace, once designed to glorify monarchy, became a breeding ground for doubt. Outside, the gilded gates, the people imagined Versailles as a paradise of excess. They pictured mountains of food while they starved, oceans of silk while they shivered, diamonds and pearls while they struggled to pay bread taxes. The affair confirmed every suspicion. If a queen could plot for diamonds, surely she cared nothing. For their misery, the irony was cruel. Marie Antoinette had never wanted the necklace. She had rejected it. But Versailles magnified falsehood into spectacle. It made a lie more visible than truth. Historians later would say, Versailles was both the crown jewel and the poisoned chalice of the monarchy. It displayed wealth but also exposed fragility. It dazzled, but it also deceived. It was a palace of performance. And when the performance failed, there was nothing left but applause for its collapse. The affair of the necklace was one act in this theater, but it revealed the deeper flaw. A monarchy that survived on image could also die by image. And Versailles, once a fortress of power, became a mirror reflecting its own downfall. After the affair of the diamond necklace, Marie Antoinette was no longer simply a queen. She became a symbol of corruption in the eyes of her people. Though innocent, though proven guiltless, her reputation was ruined. Her enemies did not need proof. They needed only suspicion, and suspicion was everywhere. In Versailles, her circle grew smaller. Once surrounded by admirers, musicians, artists, and friends, she now retreated into private rooms. She trusted fewer people. She spoke less openly. She began to feel the coldness of courtiers who feared being tainted by her disgrace. The queen who once loved laughter, theater, and music, now carried herself with a forced dignity. She smiled less, she danced rarely, she grew wary of the crowds that once adored her. For in every gaze she saw judgment. In every whisper she heard betrayal. Letters from Austria reveal her inner torment. She begged her family to understand. She wrote of her innocence, of her despair, of the cruelty of public lies her mother had warned her long before. Avoid extravagance, avoid scandal, avoid gossip. But now it was too late. Pamphlets continued to spread, each more vicious than the last, accusing her of new sins, imaginary affairs, secret conspiracies. Her silence only fueled the flames. If she spoke, she was mocked. If she denied, she was ridiculed. If she ignored, she was condemned. The king tried to shield her, but Louis XVI was no fighter of rumors. His slow nature, his hesitation, his inability to control public opinion left Marie Antoinette exposed. She stood alone against an ocean of hatred. Psychologists today might call it the weight of social isolation, the crushing of identity. The Queen, once the centerpiece of France's elegance, became its scapegoat. She was blamed for debt she did not create, wars she did not declare, luxuries she did not order. Yet she tried. She spent more time with her children. She walked in her gardens at the Petit Trianon. She sought refuge in simplicity, milking cows in her model village, playing the role of a countrywoman, but instead of healing her image, this only added to mockery. Her people laughed, saying their queen pretended to be a shepherdess while peasants starved for bread. She was trapped, condemned if she lived as a queen, condemned if she tried to live as a woman, condemned if she indulged, condemned if she withdrew. In every path she took, she found scorn. The affair of the necklace had planted a seed. That seed grew into a tree of mistrust, and under its shadow, Marie Antoinette withered. The scandal did not end in court. It lived on in her loneliness, in her broken reputation, in the slow, steady march toward her tragic fate. The affair of the diamond necklace did not end in the courtroom. It lived in the streets. It lived in the pamphlets. It lived in the whispers of Paris. The queen had been acquitted. Yet, in the minds of the people she was guilty. Guilty of arrogance. Guilty of extravagance. Guilty of indifference to their suffering. For the first time, the monarchy was openly ridiculed. Pamphlets drew the queen as a harlot, a seductress, a thief of the nation's wealth. Even the church pulpit echoed the scandal. Priests spoke of moral decay in the royal household. And for the poor, the story was irresistible. A queen who dreamed of diamonds while her subjects dreamed only of bread. The revolution was not born overnight. It was a slow fire. But the affair was dry timber thrown upon it. The scandal crystallized. Every grievance, every anger, every hunger, into a single image. Marie Antoinette, the Austrian woman who had come to France and ruined it. Politicians in the Parlement whispered too. Some saw the affair as proof that reform was urgent, that the monarchy had lost the people's trust. Others saw it as an opportunity to weaken the crown, to advance their own power. And the press, newly unleashed, spread its wings. Never before had a single scandal been so widely read, printed, and believed. The affair became not just a crime, but a weapon against monarchy, against tradition, against the very idea of divine kingship. Abroad, Europe watched with fascination. Diplomats wrote home of a monarchy losing control of its image. Foreign courts laughed at France. Kings and queens whispered of the fall of prestige. The jewel of Europe now looked tarnished, cracked, fragile. The king grew silent, unable to defend his wife. The queen grew bitter, unable to forgive her people, and between crown and nation, the bond began to break. Every future protest, every bread riot, every shout in the streets carried the memory of the necklace. The people no longer saw Marie Antoinette as Mother of France, but as Madame Deficit, a name born of pamphlets, a name born of scandal, a name that would follow her to the guillotine. Historians later called the affair the rehearsal for revolution. The people had tasted defiance. They had mocked their queen. They had doubted their king. And once that barrier was broken, there was no going back. The necklace was never worn. Its jewels never shone on Antoinette's neck. Yet its shadow covered her reign. And in that shadow, the French Revolution began to take shape. The affair of the diamond necklace was more than a crime, more than a scandal. It became a story that outlived its characters, a tale whispered in salons, printed in newspapers, remembered in history books. For Marie Antoinette, it was the beginning of the end. She could never escape it, though she was innocent. Though she denied it with all her strength, the people chose to believe the lie, and in that belief, her downfall was sealed. For Jeanne de Lamotte, the scammer who orchestrated it, history gave her a strange reward. She became immortal in infamy. A woman of cunning, a woman of ambition, a woman who dared to trick princes, priests, and even a queen. She wrote her own memoirs later, twisting the story further, painting herself as victim. But posterity remembered her as one of the most notorious women scammers in history. For Cardinal de Rohan, the affair was humiliation, a prince of the church reduced to a fool, manipulated by desire, blinded by hope, forever remembered not for his prayers, but for his gullibility. For France, the affair was poison. It infected trust. It fed the hunger for scandal. It gave the people a taste of rebellion. And when the revolution finally came, the affair stood as a prophecy, proof that monarchy could be mocked, doubted, and overthrown. The necklace itself, with its glittering diamonds, disappeared into pieces, broken, sold, scattered, no longer a jewel but a ghost. Yet its true value was never in its stones. It was in the chaos it caused, the storm it unleashed. Even today, the affair fascinates, because it asks timeless questions. How can lies destroy reputations? How can appearances outweigh truth? How can a single scandal ignite a revolution? And how can one woman, Jeanne de Lamotte, change the fate of a queen and a kingdom? The legacy of the diamond necklace affair is not only about France, it is about human weakness, greed, vanity, and the hunger for spectacle. It shows us that power can be fragile, that truth can be buried under rumor, that history is often written not by justice, but by scandal. And so, the story of Marie Antoinette and the necklace endures, a glittering tragedy, a cautionary tale, a reminder that in the theater of history, sometimes the smallest of lies can bring down the mightiest of thrones. The moment of collapse came suddenly, on the Feast of the Assumption. In the glittering halls of Versailles, Cardinal Rohan stood robed in splendor, prepared to celebrate Mass, when he was approached by the royal guards. The order came directly from Louis XVI. The cardinal was arrested publicly, in front of the court, in front of bishops, princes, and nobles. The crowd gasped. Whispers spread instantly. Why would the king arrest a prince of the church unless the charges were grave, unless the scandal was enormous? Rohan, bewildered, stammered that he had only acted on the queen's behalf, that he had served her loyalty, that he had risked everything to please her. He believed the queen herself would protect him, but instead, she stood frozen in fury. She declared him a liar, a fool, a traitor. She swore she had never written to him, never forgiven him, never sought the cursed necklace. Jeanne too was arrested, along with her husband, with Villette the forger, and with D'Oliva the unfortunate actress, each of them dragged into the net they had spun. Paris erupted. The affair of the necklace was no longer secret. It was spectacle. It was scandal. It was fuel poured on the flames of hatred already burning against Marie Antoinette. Pamphlets exploded across the city, each more scandalous than the last. Some painted the queen as a seductress, using Rohan as her puppet. Some mocked her as reckless, wasting fortunes while the people starved. Others whispered she had orchestrated the entire affair to satisfy her hunger for diamonds. The truth no longer mattered. The pamphlets, the gossip, the rage of the streets all merged into a storm. In cafes, in salons, in marketplaces, people laughed, cursed, and condemned their queen. They believed she was guilty because they wanted her to be guilty. The trial began before the Parliament of Paris, the most public court in the kingdom. Nobles and commoners alike flocked to hear testimony, to witness humiliation. Jeanne played her role brilliantly, casting herself as a victim, a poor woman wronged, a pawn of the mighty. Her lies laced with tears, her courage admired. The Cardinal, too, claimed innocence, declaring that he had only obeyed the Queen's secret wishes. And though the truth pointed to Jeanne, public opinion turned not against her but against Marie Antoinette, for the people were ready to hate their queen, ready to see her shamed, ready to strip her of dignity. In the end, the court acquitted Rohan. He was freed, his reputation bruised but intact. Jeanne was condemned, though she escaped later into exile. D'Oliva too was freed, seen as an innocent, and Villette, the forger, was banished. But Marie Antoinette, though not on trial, was judged in the eyes of her people, and she was condemned. Without defense, she had nothing to do with the scheme. But the affair clung to her like smoke. It stained her name, it poisoned her image, and it cemented the phrase whispered in salons and shouted in pamphlets, that she was not the Queen of France, but Madame Deficit, the woman who ruined the kingdom. The scandal was not just about a necklace, it was about power, trust, and image. It proved that truth could be buried beneath lies, that appearances could destroy reality, and that a crown, once mocked, could never shine the same again. The affair of the diamond necklace did not end with the verdict. It lingered, like smoke that seeps into stone, staining everything it touches. Marie Antoinette had been declared innocent by law, but in the eyes of her people she was guilty. Guilty of arrogance, guilty of extravagance, guilty of crimes she never committed. The pamphlets did not stop. In fact, they multiplied, more vicious, more mocking, more obscene. They painted her not as a queen, but as a monster, a foreign parasite feeding on the lifeblood of France. She was called Madame Deficit, a name that spread like wildfire, whispered in salons, shouted in taverns, scratched onto walls in the countryside. Peasants heard of the necklace scandal in distorted echoes. They believed their queen had stolen millions while they starved. They believed she sold her honor for jewels. They believed she laughed at their hunger. The truth no longer mattered. The story had become a myth, and myths are stronger than facts. At Versailles, the queen tried to recover. She appeared at ceremonies, dressed with dignity, trying to display majesty, but the glances, the whispers, the coldness of the court told her the damage was beyond repair. Her enemies at court, those who despised her Austrian blood, those who envied her influence, now had the perfect weapon. They no longer needed proof. They only needed suspicion. Jeanne de Valois, though punished, became a strange kind of heroine. The people admired her cunning, her defiance, her audacity to bring down the mighty. Pamphlets even praised her, turning a fraud into a folk figure, a symbol of rebellion against corrupt nobility. Cardinal Rohan, though disgraced, was still embraced by many. They pitied him. They believed he too was a victim of the Queen. His acquittal was seen as proof, not of his innocence, but of the Queen's guilt. The Parlement of Paris, by acquitting Rohan, had sent a message, a subtle defiance against the crown. It was a sign that royal authority was no longer absolute, that the Queen herself could be mocked, doubted, and condemned. This scandal, which began with forged letters and a necklace of diamonds, became something larger. It became a mirror of France itself, a kingdom drowning in debt, consumed by gossip, hungry for scandal, desperate for change. Every pamphlet, every joke, every whispered insult at the Queen chipped away at the respect once commanded by the monarchy, and when respect is gone, power soon follows. Historians later would say, the revolution was not caused by a necklace, but the necklace was a spark, a symbol, a wound that never healed. For when the Bastille fell, when mobs filled the streets, when the Queen was dragged before her people, many still remembered the affair of the diamond necklace. They remembered the lies, the jewels, the shame, and they believed, with fury, that it had all been true. Thus, a scam, born of greed and vanity, became more than a crime. It became history. It became prophecy. It became one of the stones that paved the road to revolution. In 18th century France, words were weapons, and pamphlets were their bullets. Cheap, portable, easy to pass from hand to hand. Pamphlets became the true voice of the people, more powerful than sermons, more dangerous than decrees. They carried satire, venom, and scandal. And in the affair of the diamond necklace, pamphlets reached their darkest glory. The scandal gave writers endless material. They mocked the Queen as vain, greedy, and lustful. They ridiculed her supposed secret meetings, her hunger for diamonds, her manipulation of Cardinal Rohan. Even though none of it was true, the pamphlets turned lies into legends. Some pamphlets described Marie Antoinette as a courtesan disguised as a queen. Others accused her of selling the necklace to foreign enemies. Some went further, inventing entire dialogues where she supposedly laughed at starving peasants while adorning herself with jewels. The exaggerations were grotesque, but they were believed. In cafes of Paris, readers would gather around a single sheet, passing it aloud, savoring each insult. In salons, nobles and intellectuals quoted the sharpest lines, pretending to analyze but secretly delighting in the humiliation of their queen. One notorious pamphlet, Le Petit Almanach de nos Grandes Dames, painted her as Madame Deficit, mocking her spending, her gambling, her dresses, her theater performances. Another filthy pamphlet suggested she was the lover of both men and women in court, describing Versailles as a house of sin. The poison of these texts was not just in their words, but in their reach. They traveled far beyond Paris, carried by travelers, smugglers, even priests, reaching the countryside where peasants who had never seen the Queen began to imagine her as a demon draped in silk. For a monarchy built on image, on ceremony, on the sacred aura of majesty, this destruction of image was fatal. Marie Antoinette could wear crowns, host balls, baptize heirs. But none of it mattered, because in the minds of her people, she was already corrupted, already fallen. The affair of the necklace gave pamphleteers exactly what they craved: a scandal that mixed sex, greed, and betrayal. It was a story that sold itself, and once written, it could not be unwritten. The French monarchy had no answer. The king could issue decrees, the queen could deny rumors, but paper was faster than law, gossip was louder than truth, and scandal was sweeter than reason. Thus, the affair was not just a personal humiliation, it was a cultural turning point. It showed that words could undo crowns, that satire could dethrone majesty, that when a people laughed at their queen, they were only one step away from dragging her into the streets. Versailles was more than a palace. It was a theater, a golden stage where kings performed majesty, and courtiers played roles of loyalty, grace, and power. Every marble hall, every chandelier, every fountain was built not just to impress, but to overwhelm, to remind France that its monarch was almost divine. But behind the brilliance of mirrors and gilded ceilings, there was rot. The court was a world of endless intrigue. Gossip spread faster than truth. Alliances shifted with every glance, and scandals were currency. The affair of the diamond necklace thrived in this environment. It was not born in silence. It was born in whispers, in corridors, in jealous salons,